All right, it's noon, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Haven Spanier. I'm the Director of Student and Young Alumni Engagement at the Alumni Association. And we're excited to have you all here for our Career Day event today in partnership with the Career Center. So before I introduce our host, I just want to remind you all, if you haven't joined us for an online event before, that we welcome all of your questions. We hope this will be an interactive event. So if you have any questions at all for Patrick throughout the event, you will type those into the chat feature. If you don't use Zoom a lot and you don't know where that is, there should be a little button across the bottom of your screen that says chat. So if you'll just pull that up, you can type your questions in there anytime, and Patrick will do his best to get to all of those today. But without further ado, I want to introduce our host. A 2007 alumnus, Patrick Donovan is currently a director of sponsorship consulting at global lifestyle marketing agency MKTG within their sports and entertainment division. He has over 10 years of experience in the industry and focuses primarily on ensuring his clients are maximizing the value of their partnerships with leading sports and entertainment properties. Prior to MKTG, Patrick spent time with the Volvo Car Open, the Tax Slayer Bowl, and U of SC Athletics. A Charlotte, North Carolina resident, Patrick is also a member of the University of South Carolina Young Alumni Council and the first tee of Charlotte's Young Professionals organization. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. I know we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone who's able to join and giving up their lunch hour, so to speak, for what we'll call a lunch and learn. And I'm proud to represent the university, and hundreds of folks who've come before me throughout the industry and really made an impact. And I think giving back is something that I'm passionate about, and something that we can all do. You think about giving back, it's not always financial. It's all about time and networking and relationships, et cetera. And this is a good way for us to do it in the current environment, right? So, a couple of just housekeeping items. Let's keep this as conversational as possible. Feel free to stop me and ask questions either via the chat or through the Zoom mic. I'm happy and willing to answer anything that you all may have. And if I don't have an answer right now, I'll certainly kind of get something back to you after the fact. So, Haven touched a little bit on my bio, but just a little bit of background about myself. Graduate of the class of 2007 and kind of had a dual degree in sport management and business administration. There are a couple classes that really piqued my interest in the sports marketing realm. And majority of them around branding and how brands really kind of get their name out in the marketplace to drive purchase consideration, to drive awareness, et cetera. And there are a couple projects I remember that I gravitated toward, and that kind of really set my path the last 10 plus years, not only in the sports industry but sports marketing in particular. One of those environments was around the Jordan brand and how they really select athletes to represent all the attributes that they believe that their company does, right? And so, the selection process that entails, and then it's like, okay, once you're on board as a kind of a Jordan team member, representative, or athlete, how they kind of brought that to life and kind of how they executed, just really highlighting those folks there to really kind of, again, purchase consideration, brand awareness, really talk about the stories and the attributes that the Jordan brand represents. And then there's another class that kind of focused on, a little more towards the sponsorship side. And there's a few projects that focused on, collegiate bowl sponsorships, right? So I think those were probably the two things that benefited me the most and opening my eyes in terms of the opportunities and really kind of what pushed me down this greater path. I think my time at the university as a whole was phenomenal. I was involved in sport and entertainment management club, student game clock club, alumni association, student member, et cetera. And I think that those groups and organizations as a whole are no different in the professional workplace, whether it be the marketing industry industry, finance, HR, et cetera. It's all about relationships, resources, team collaboration, commitment, and really kind of doing what's best for your constituents. So, a lot of things I learned at a young age at the university that have helped kind of drive me and will continue to drive me kind of throughout my career moving forward. Give everyone a little bit of a background on MKTG. So we've got over 1,200 employees across the globe. Our two biggest headquarters are in New York City, kind of in Manhattan office, as well as one in London. Primarily in the U.S., our sports entertainment divisions are focused in Chicago, Cincinnati, Atlanta, Charlotte, and then Westport, Connecticut, which is basically, a 30, 45-minute train ride outside of Manhattan. And that's, like I said, primarily where I've spent my time. And we work with clients on the, tech side, automotive side, logistics, et cetera. So you think about, blue label brands such as Toyota, IBM, AT&T, FedEx, Ally Bank, and so on and so forth. And they really kind of help operate or execute sponsorship programs, the Masters, the Super Bowl, the Daytona 500, US Open, Wimbledon, et cetera. So, we've been very fortunate as a company. I've been fortunate as an individual and as an employee of the company to really learn a lot about those events and what they do for the fans and local economies, and how these big brands leverage that to help drive their business, whether it be a new product launch, whether it be something like, hey, here's a point of differentiation for us in the marketplace. Let's leverage our relationships and leverage our sponsorships to really tell this story. I think there's one benefit that I think that I've really started to appreciate over the last few years is, yes, you may have a client that's focused on, the sports marketing portfolio of the brand, but you're going to be introduced to several other departments and several other decision makers within that greater organization, because generally, marketing is quote unquote the front door of the business. That's how you start to learn about a company and what they can provide, their beliefs, their offer, their mission statement, et cetera. So that's something that, we really push ourselves on as a team, the company, to really not only establish those relationships, but to continue to grow them, because at some point they may be a potential client in the future, just whether at another organization, or we get another piece of business within that same department. I think it's just key for us to really nurture the relationships and really say, hey, these assets that your company pays for can be more than just billboards and awareness. Like, you can really use certain things for in-depth storytelling and really kind of help drive the marketing messages they have internally. I think the big thing maybe some folks have is how have we been impacted through, the pandemic and et cetera. So I can touch on that as well. I think just to give a quick story, it was probably mid-March when we found out, and I was actually on a golf trip with several other alums, and we were just kind of catching up, having dinner, and that's when the news of the NBA broke of, player tested positive, they were shutting the games down, going to do some research, and then within 48 hours, the league shut down. So, that impacted us to say, hey, what other leagues are going to kind of follow suit to say, we need to do some more diligence, we need to do some more research. What is the ultimate impact going to be across the board? So, what went from a nice kind of golf getaway weekend, as you guys can imagine, my mind was spinning, the wheels are turning, like, hey, what's the impact going to be, not only short-term and long-term for the client, but also, our teammates and, the company, the office, et cetera. There's a big ripple effect, as you all can imagine. So, basically what we've been doing the last 6 months or so is really analyzing our clients' portfolios, knowing that, we're big into NASCAR. A couple of our clients are big into NASCAR from an automotive side. So as you all can imagine, it's, A, what's happening with the competition? Are we still going to be able to compete? What's the schedule going to be like? What attendance, et cetera. And then on the flip side is, what are we going to be able to do in terms of really engaging fans or consumers, knowing that majority of sporting events, even until now, it's limited or no capacity. I think that's generally on site where folks can make the biggest impact with potential customers or buyers, is really interacting with a brand in person, one-on-one. You have that kind of human connection, human interaction, which goes a long way, in our opinion. So, in analyzing the portfolio, we figured out like, where are we weak, where are we strong, based on certain investments, what technically is owed back to you, because we're not getting fans in attendance, we don't have the ability to host customers and host potential clients in hospitality suites. I mean, there's such a domino effect of what happens that we had to kind of quickly scale down or scale up certain pieces of our programs. And the other part is, generally the first thing to go in a budget are kind of sponsorship and marketing dollars. And whether it's just because that money's being cut or it's being reallocated to a different department to help support them, it all varies based on the company and the product and what their ultimate goal is. But we're still facing certain scenarios where budgets are cut. We've got to be a little more nimble and a little more agile with what we have, and really utilize certain programs and certain technologies that have been around for a few years, but everyone's kind of really adapted them more in the last 6 months and the last 5 years, in my honest opinion. And I think that's the two big things were, how are we going to continue to engage fans, and then B, these investments that we've made to certain leagues or sanctioning bodies or facilities, how are we going to be able to kind of recoup some funds, knowing that they haven't delivered on certain contracts and contractual assets? And we've worked closely with certain legal teams and finance teams, and I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly understand how payment structures are created and assets that you're guaranteed, but you're not getting back, and really finding a happy medium between our clients and like I said, the sanctioning bodies or the actual properties, because they also were impacted largely, right? Like, you think about folks, if they can't have fans on site, they're not selling tickets, they're not selling parking, they're not selling concessions. That's a big chunk of their revenue, especially in conjunction with the partnerships that they sell. If the partners are asking for money back and they're not making money through the gate, that puts them in kind of a world of hurt. But I think what we've noticed is everyone's kind of in this together, in terms of like, look, we understand that everyone's been impacted across the board. We're not going to necessarily just cancel certain agreements or to get the legal team too much involved in terms of any types of suits or anything. It's just more about, let's come to an agreement that's mutually beneficial for both sides, but it's also respective of the language that's in the contract too. And I think ultimately everybody wants to get through this together and move past this and move forward, which we're going to continue to do. But again, this is an industry that's built on relationships and networks, and folks always remember how you treated them in the good times and the bad times. And that's something that we kind of pride ourselves on, is, hey, we have the best interest of the clients in mind, but we also know with these events struggling, like, they ultimately need to kind of, they need to lend too, right? So what does that look like? So those are the two big things. I mean, we've certainly adapted and adjusted, just like everyone else on this call has. I think, we've all had more virtual phone calls and conferences in the last 6 months than we've had for the last 10 years. And this technology is not necessarily new. It's just it's more utilized, it's more prevalent. And I think you've probably seen that with, certain increases in stock prices for certain companies. But I think what we've been able to do with clients is utilize certain, we'll take some athletes that they have on their roster. Instead of doing maybe an in-person meet and greet or something in the hospitality space at an event, we've been able to leverage that. And it's like, hey, now we can identify your best customers. Let's get them on kind of a more intimate conversation via Zoom, where folks can really have that kind of one-to-one interaction. And believe it or not, it still goes a long way, and really kind of helping build that brand and build that relationship, and say, hey, you know what, like, this isn't the ideal scenario for them, but they're still making the best of it and making it work as much as they can, because the business doesn't stop. Sports there was a hiatus, but then all of a sudden, you look at the last 2 months, there's been a backlog of sports, right? Between the NBA, MLB, NHL, motorsports, college football coming back. College basketball is going to come back within the next month, 6 weeks. So there was a break where everyone kind of figured out certain protocol and certain procedures. And obviously that those are conversations that we're not involved of, just because it's, there's state governments, local governments, there's property, senior teams, they're all having the same conversations. It's tough to really kind of sit by and wait when we knew at some point it was going to turn. It's just a matter of what is that going to be? Is it 10% capacity for fans? Is it 25% capacity for fans, et cetera? That's kind of how that would work there. And really just kind of speaking on kind of the backlog of, all the sports back. I'm sure some of you folks have either read or heard about the decline in viewership for, any number of properties and leagues. So you think about that and how that's impacted the TV rights holders, right? So you think about the Fox, the CBS, the NBCs, the ESPNs of the world. If they're getting a decline in ratings, their advertising prices are going to get slashed, right? Because there's just a domino effect of what folks are seeing and what folks are able to do. And what I would say to that is, there may be a decline in the numbers, and I'll be the first one to tell you that the numbers can essentially say whatever you want to say based on how you want to spin it or based on what the context is. But you're still getting a massive live audience, sports, still essentially DVR proof, so to speak. So there's still a lot of value there. And, the other part of that too is just because you're not watching the event live doesn't mean you're not consuming it via Twitter or Instagram or any other type of means, right? So I think that's something that we're going to start to see kind of in the industry is it's more of a consumption report versus just, hey, here's old school TV media metrics and reporting. Like, okay, it's great, but if we know that Patrick is a Kansas City Chiefs fan, he can't watch the Chiefs game because he's at another priority, doesn't mean I'm not following along on Gamecast or Twitter or whatever other type of means that might be. So I think that's something to think about as well. The flip side of the business is, what are we doing as a company to keep folks engaged and, to keep folks motivated? And again, everyone's been impacted in different ways. And whether you've got a family at home and you're working and you've got, virtual school, I give so much credit to those folks, and they all deserve a type of medal, in my opinion, because that is a feat that I can't imagine doing right now. And I think for us, it's more about, how can we still implement and really bring to life the culture of the agency that we work with and we work for via Zoom, right? And I think, initial example for me is this tie. So every Tuesday for the last 6 months, some of the guys we've had tie Tuesday just to kind of say, hey, you know what? Let's just do something quirky. Let's keep folks kind of on engaged and moving forward with certain things. And this is stuck. We've had the happy hours. We've had different, quizzes where folks have, they've received baby pictures from their family. And you kind of figure out who's who based on certain things, Jeopardy type games, etc. And we try to do that bi-weekly, just because, we're also cognizant of what you all probably read, Zoom fatigue, right? Like it's so easy to just assume someone's camera is going to be on from 8:30 to 6 all day, every day. And, candidly, that kind of wears you out more than being in the office, in my opinion. So I think there's certainly a balance and a common ground you can strike. And I think we've encouraged folks to, if you have a one-on-one call with someone or a small team call, like go out and do it while you're going for a walk, get some fresh air, get some blood flow. That just getting outside of the four walls you see all day, in my opinion, makes a huge impact just on your sanity and kind of the way you'll certainly approach certain things. So obviously that's still, a continued work in progress. Anyone who's, familiar with the industry is probably, you've seen the news and reports of pay cuts and furloughs and all what that entails. And, that's unfortunate. And that's what's going to happen when, the economy kind of takes a hit. And like I said, the first things that typically go are sponsorship events, marketing dollars, et cetera. and unfortunately that kind of just falls to us. So, we're always looking for ways to, to keep folks kind of upbeat and engaged and really understand, like, hey, your work and your value is still extremely important at this current time. And, in the long game is it's going to come back bigger than ever before. Fortunately, I don't have a crystal ball when that might be, but I do think, as we get into 2021 and even 2022 is probably more likely, I think you're going to see the boom come back. And I know I've been speaking for 20 minutes straight, so I see a couple questions in the chat. Jessica, I'll answer yours first. Can you share what your conversations with clients look like in terms of developing contracts that meet their marketing needs? What are some of the marketing strategies you employ for your clients? That's a great question. So I think, and that the first part is, what are we developing in terms of contracts? It's, what are their goals and objectives? Like, what is a company? Why are you entering in an agreement with, I'll say, Major League Baseball? Is it something just because you want some outfield signage, or is it, or do you want access to the players? I think that's part of what that might be. And I'll use Scott's as an example, right? Scott's is the official lawn care provider of the MLB, which you're like, oh, that's kind of broad and kind of random, but it's like you think about Major League Baseball parks and the grass and how that, I mean, they're literally the official playing field surface essentially, right? And the way they bring that to life through their retailers at Lowe's and Home Depot and otherwise, and other kind of home goods stores, home improvement stores, I think is a great way for them to kind of leverage that relationship, because it does make sense for them. You think about a Toyota, Ford, or Chevy, like, okay, why are you in NASCAR? Well, because we're an automotive company, we sell cars. Toyota, Ford, and Chevy are the three cars that race every Saturday and Sunday. What does that ultimately mean for them? There's enough data out there that supports, if your car performs well on Sunday, then the likelihood of purchase consideration, or folks maybe go on to the dealership on that Monday, is strong. And they even take it to a point where, Toyota, for example, they race a Camry, which you're like, okay, it's a Camry, but the way they've been able to leverage that model and that kind of vehicle on track versus to what they do in market or at the dealership has really proven a successful strategy for them. Especially as you think about what people traditionally think is a Japanese-based company, whereas, Toyota, the Camry is built in Kentucky, the Toyota Tundra is built in San Antonio, Texas, and that's the only place in the world that manufactures and produces a Toyota Tundra. So I think their strategy, a decade or two ago was, okay, NASCAR's big with Americana, the Heartland, et cetera. How can we leverage that, thinking folks are going to be believing we're a Japanese company? Okay, well, let us come in. Not only are we going to showcase our car and product, we're also going to tell these stories about about the impact we provide to the United States. So employment, local economies, et cetera. And that stuff has certainly started to work for them. And I think the other part is, what's your brand? What are your brand attributes? How do you want to describe yourself? Are you kind of a more, I use Wendy's, for example, right? Like, you don't think anything about Wendy's, but they have a tremendous kind of social presence where they're a little edgy in the way they kind of push messaging and push product and really engage with not only the customers, but also their competitors. I think that's something that, if you're negotiating certain contracts, it's like, okay, we're going to need a lot more. We're going to heavy up on the digital and social components of it versus maybe something either on site or in broadcast or either in hospitality space. So that, I think, hopefully, Jessica, that answers your first question. And I think the second one, what do we employ for us? I think it's all about really educating them about, the company as a whole. So you think about, we'll say Mars, Snickers, and their NFL sponsorship. You're not you when you're hungry, right? So the last 2 years, we've kind of come up with a concept that's called the Hunger Chain, the Hunger Award, where each week a player will get basically a necklace with a big Snickers S on it that kind of signifies, like, hey, you had a great game, you had a great week, you've earned this Snickers Hunger Award. And from there, that will kind of ladder into a piece in an NFL broadcast where Snickers buys, a 30-second or 45-second spot where they interview that player. He has his chain on, and then that will kind of then get pushed into a social post. So I think, we employ a lot of, for us, it's really understanding their goals and objectives of kind of being in this partnership space that they're in, and then from there applying certain things they're going to help them kind of reach a different audience. So if we know, it's just hypothetical, that the NBA performs better on Instagram than it does on Facebook, like, okay, let's heavy up on those assets and let's really focus on what we know works best on Instagram, whether it be stories, very impactful imagery, et cetera, versus, the Facebook type of assets and creative. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. If not, happy to have a little more in-depth conversation about that. And then kind of going back up to Doug, what client of MKTG would be the best fit to partner with Gamecock Athletics? Oh, that's a phenomenal question. And I think it just depends on, do we have a client who wants to really engage in that collegiate space? You think about, for most companies, the audience they want to entertain the most, or they want to kind of really engage with the most, is from that 18 to 34-year-old range. And that's for a variety of different reasons. So I think collegiate athletics brings that tenfold, right? You've got all the students, you've got the young alumni base, et cetera. So I think it's just a matter of who has a product or who as a company wants to kind of really hone in on that audience, and then think about all the different, whether it be football, the volleyball team, women's basketball, softball, soccer, et cetera. I think from there, they could layer in certain pieces of really kind of customized programming to really kind of tap into that, that passion and the traditions and legacy, et cetera, that just college sports, in my opinion, has to offer across the board. And then the most recent question, how would you define your target audience? Kind of just touched on that briefly. I think that question would be, again, what's the company, what's the product they want to sell? So if you think about what I will say is, I'll say a FedEx, for example, do they want to go after, they're big into the small businesses, because small businesses, they ship, they need all the logistical help that they can possibly get. And I think FedEx has really kind of tapped into that market and just basically been the de facto, the official shipping provider of small businesses, much more than some of their other competitors. And I think to extend that example, FedEx is a primary partner of Joe Gibbs Racing, one of the NASCAR drivers. And if you watch the race on Sunday, you're going to see FedEx logos all over one particular car. And they leverage that by bringing out certain guests and certain small businesses who've performed really well in a certain market, to bring them out to the race and say, hey, this is not only thanks for doing a great job and being a great customer, but B, it also kind of keeps that relationship building. And say, hey, look at that experience they gave me. Why would I ever want to go to one of their competitors based on that day and that memory that they provided me and my family, or me and my coworkers that particular Sunday? So I think the audience, it's all going to be based on what the client want, what are their overarching goals, what do they want to be, who they want to speak to, et cetera. I think there's obviously certain properties that we would recommend to certain folks, and that meet that criteria, or that really going to help them kind of push the envelope. So again, World Surfing League, right? That's a property, it's a professional surf league. We're not going to say, hey, you need to buy a bunch of ad space during 60 minutes or during certain golf pieces, right? I think we understand who that primary age range is going to be. We understand what they probably like based on certain research and their purchase habits and considerations. And I think that kind of helps guide us to a certain degree. A couple other questions. What made you want to work in the sports marketing industry? I think for me, it was a combination of, I always want to be in sports, and then kind of the advertising piece. I always, really enjoyed not only the classes that I took at Carolina, but also just found myself kind of having that passion, say, hey, I like advertising, I like branding, I like sports, and really kind of what it does for communities and folks for a 4 to 6 hour day, kind of gives them a break. Like, how can I kind of match those two interests? And, been fortunate for, like I said, 10 plus years now, and here I am, and hopefully that continues for well beyond today. And then Megan, good question. How did I get started on this career path? So just taking a couple steps back, when I was at Carolina, I was required to do 2 internships. The last one I completed was actually in conjunction with another Gamecock alum. So I kind of had my foot in the door there, which was phenomenal. And then he took another job, and 6 months later he had another opportunity, and I was kind of the first one he called, or so he tells me. So I kind of followed him for the first couple of career progressions, and then ever since then, that's kind of been my path. And I think it goes back to relationships and networking. You'll never know, or you may not have an understanding of who may be impactful or who could be a great resource for you at any given time. And for me, I'm still in close contact with this gentleman today, with good friends, et cetera. And I'm fortunate that he took a chance on me. And I think opportunities like I'm doing today, it's just to give back and to educate and really kind of, what did I not receive during my time there? I want to kind of rectify that and kind of continue to kind of educate and grow the programs. Let's see, Brian, to answer your question, yeah, I did 2 internships. One was with the Volvo Car Open in Daniel Island, which is right outside of Charleston, South Carolina, kind of in their business operations department. And I also did the Tax Slayer Bowl in Jacksonville, Florida, kind of in their marketing department as well. Kendall, what minors do I think would help set us up on the right track? I think it's twofold, right? The more just understanding of business that you have, and that can just be general things, right? Like I'm not necessarily talking about widgets and accounting, but understanding, certain processes and how businesses are built, how they operate, and really just a top line view of that works. But then also anything that can really give you a leg up. I know we're primarily talking about sports and marketing, but what we've tried to really kind of shift to recently in terms of our recruiting or hiring process is there's so many experiences and traits and attributes that are complementary to one another or that are transferable, right? Just because you don't have a certain degree or you don't have that, an internship with the Gamecocks or one with the Braves or the Yankees, whatever that might be, doesn't mean that your skills aren't transferable. I think it's really a matter of identifying, 1 or 2 things that want to set yourself apart, and whether that be in, it could be social media, right? Think about the blast that's taken in the last 10 years in terms of, hey, here's how you create content, here's how you post content. But then here are the analytics. What are the analytics telling us? Okay, well, maybe we shouldn't try that strategy because these posts are performing low. And then on the flip side, television has probably taken a hit in a certain degree in terms of people buying advertising spots, because now you can buy paid posts on all the platforms for much cheaper than what you would traditionally buy spots and dots. So I think hopefully that gives you an idea of certain majors or certain attributes I think you could kind of really focus on. And I apologize if I'm starting to miss any folks. I know there's really appreciate all the questions. This is phenomenal. I think Mac, I think this is a good question and relevant for the group, is what advice do you have for recent graduates hoping to work in sports marketing and key learnings from my career that would be willing to share? Absolutely. And I think, the first thing I would say is, don't be above a certain job, right? If you see an opportunity that you're interested in, but you're like, okay, well, that team or this organization is not really well known, I don't want to live in this city, I think you've got to put yourself out there and really try it, because I think as you think about internships or practicums or even your entry-level job, that's going to really set the tone for you to say, hey, I don't necessarily enjoy these long hours or these long work weeks or travel. That, I think, is just getting an understanding, the experience of what the industry entails and what a certain role entails will certainly help you and really kind of clarify certain questions you may have, and to a certain degree may challenge dedication as well. I think key learnings for me, I think, is you always need to be educated, right? There's learning's never going to stop. Whether, like I kind of mentioned, a few seconds ago, is the rise in social media. That's something that we need to really have a grasp on as an office and as a company, because that's going to continue to grow and continue to offer opportunities for our clients in certain leagues and properties. So we need to be able to really formalize a recommendation and kind of just a general perspective on how those things work. And think about the rise in, sports gambling, right? So, within the last year, a lot of leagues have lifted those kind of bans, and now they're entering partnerships with, certain casinos or, FanDuel, all these sports books that traditionally have been, untouchable, so to speak, now it's the way of the future. Because it's another revenue stream for leagues and teams, and they understand the importance and the usage rates of these types of partnerships and that kind of the platforms, right? It's incredible what's changed in the last year or so. Jillian, how early did you start looking for internships? I probably started looking as early as my sophomore year. I think I would recommend work with your advisors, work with your professors, just to have an understanding of A, what and when is required, but B, the more research you can do in advance, and even potentially, strike a conversation or establish a relationship with someone, I think that'll be helpful for you as you decide what internships you may want to, proceed with, or at least kind of do some diligence on. But I don't think it's ever too early. Just have an understanding. Here's what's out there. Here's how, as in the current form, how I match with a certain need or a certain requirement. I think from there you can kind of back into more information, into more just an opportunity for yourself. Let's see. Casey, you touched on full-time for recent grads. Is there a different approach for finding internships in the sports marketing industry? Good question. I don't necessarily think so. A lot of what I've learned and what prepared me for the current role is what I did in my internships. I think it's really just, you've got to challenge yourself and really find what drives you and what you're passionate about, and have that understanding of like, look, there's going to be ups and downs in any profession, in any realm. But at the end of the day, is this something you want to come back to and really kind of dedicate yourself to? Because again, it's rewarding, but there's long days, long nights, long weeks. I don't think the approach should be any different. I think it's a matter of identifying what you ultimately want to do, and then the other part would be, can you develop a skill that may be a good differentiator for you from the other candidates that go in. Trust me, I understand, and I think for years have probably gone off on a tangent about how difficult the hiring recruiting process is for applicants. You submit something to a black hole, and all of a sudden you don't hear back, outside from an automated email that just says, hey, we appreciate your interest, but unfortunately going to another direction. Like that needs to change, and I'm a big proponent of that. Now how that's going to happen, we'll certainly see, but I think you just be patient, be convicted in what you stand for and what you want to do, and that should help you and guide you. I'm going back through. I know I've missed a couple. Let's see. And Haven, keep me honest here.
I think you've answered most of them so far, but I'll dig for you.
Appreciate that. Here's a question. Are there any sports teams you're interested in working with that you haven't? Not in particular, no. I mean, I think probably league-wise, I would say, I'd like, we as a company, me personally, would like to work more, with the NBA and the Major League Baseball. We've got a great rapport and portfolio with NASCAR, the PGA Tour, the NFL. I think that we still have some work to do on those leagues I previously mentioned, just based on whether it be getting new business with clients who are already partnered with those leagues, or just really establishing strong relationships with the right folks over at those properties to really help open more doors for us. but as it relates to individual teams, not specifically. I think if you haven't heard this before, you'll certainly hear it, whether from a professor or through some other folks within the industry. Is, a lot of folks say that you don't want to work in a sport that's your favorite sport, right? You don't want to ever lose that business sense due to the fandom, or you don't want to necessarily work for your favorite team at times either, right? Now, I think there's always an opportunity for that. So that's certainly not gospel, but I know some folks have, they generally preach like, hey, you're such a diehard college football fan or NHL fan. Can you turn the blinders off, to really kind of do what's best for your company, your clients, et cetera? Or are you going to kind of just divert back to just being a fan, which, there's certainly some pros and cons there. Most challenging part of my job, good question. I think it's just stuff moves so fast, and, whether it be, emerging technologies or, new company products or updates or any type of company-wide news or client-wide news that's going to impact us, just really understanding like, okay, here's a scenario, here's not only how it impacts us as a company, but what's the trickle-down effect to a team and our teammates, et cetera. So I think really just trying to, time management, efficiencies, and just really trying to be on top of everything as a whole. And you don't want to get caught behind, because it's evident when you are, and that's just not a good feeling. Favorite part of my job, I would say, it's easy to say, hey, some of the events we go to, right? I've been fortunate to go to a handful of Super Bowls, handful of PGA Tour tournaments, et cetera. But I think for us, we take it for granted. But when you think about what we're doing on behalf of our clients to really interact and engage with fans, when you see the smiles on these folks' face, whether they're entering the facility or post game or even via Zoom, right? It's like, wow, we just made an impact. Look at how excited these folks are to engage with our brand or a brand based on the fact that they're such a big fan of football or soccer, whatever that might be. I think it's just, the experience that you see people have had is, it's not irreplaceable, but it makes you feel good at the end of the day. When the long hours and the long days are certainly worth it. Ooh, favorite sport to watch, I would say college football is probably the first, but anything Carolina related is always going to be the top of my list. So probably, Gamecock football, Gamecock basketball would be the top two. Favorite to work in? I would say, just because I'm, a lot of my work is primarily within NASCAR space, I'll say NASCAR, and it's just because the access that the fans get. You can literally be within 5 feet of the cars going 250 miles per hour, which is incredible. And, they have access to the drivers, which, you're not going to be able to, high five Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson at any given moment prior to one of their games. But, NASCAR, the fans are in the workspaces in the garage, so to speak, which for them, and just a fan perspective, there's no sport that does it any better and more impactful, in my opinion.
All right. It looks like our questions are starting to wrap up, but if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to type those into the chat so we can make sure Patrick gets to them today. I'll give you just a minute if you have any last burning questions. We covered a lot of ground today. I know I personally learned a lot. I'm sure everyone watching did as well, especially students we have who are interested in going into this industry, or maybe alumni that are either working in it already or interested in a career shift. Looks like we got everyone's questions though. So thank you to all of you for joining today on your lunch hour. And thank you again, Patrick, so much for taking your time out of your workday to host and to talk with all the Gamecocks here. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate the time. If there's any other questions that come up, obviously you can route them through Haven or probably track me down somewhere on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer those as best as I can. But again, to your point, I certainly appreciate everyone taking their lunch hour to join, and great questions. Really appreciate the participation.
All right, thanks y'all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.